Getting the job done right is the goal of every home builder and homeowner. As a member of our building community, All Access will become a trusted resource for every stage of your building and renovation projects. Plus, we're constantly adding new project guides, videos, articles, expert tips, and more for members only, because there's always more work to be done. Sign up now or give a gift to another builder at finehomebuilding.com/allaccess. Because the paint absorbs less heat from the sun than it emits, a surface coated with this paint is cooled below the surrounding temperature without consuming power. That is mind-blowing to me. How does that work?
It's really white paint, Patrick. Really, really white.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor Mark Peterson.
Hello.
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Director Brian Pontalillo.
Hey, everyone.
And our amazing producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, gents, it is good to see you. Thanks for being here this morning.
Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
So is it fall yet in Kentucky, Mark?
No, it never, the weird thing is my wife and I were just having a conversation about this morning. It's going to be 80 some degrees for the next 3 days. It's like, what? I mean, this is my first year here, so I ask everybody, it's like, is this normal? And then finally I just searched it today and apparently we're having like the warmest October in history. So to answer your question, no, it's not.
So is it, when does fall commonly start? Did you dive into that?
Yeah, well, normally the average temp in October is 61 degrees, and I think we're at about 70 plus degrees right now. So yeah, it should be turning. And now, I don't think we get the colors though, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we really get the fall colors like Minnesota did or the Northeast does, but we'll see.
It's definitely fall here. Lots of leaves falling and they're looking beautiful. The drive to my son's school this morning was pretty cool with the fog in the river valleys, which is something that's neat that happens this time of year.
Foggy, yeah. I'm in a river valley and it's foggy every morning.
That's neat, right?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it.
So, Brian, you shared with us at a staff meeting that you recently had the energy modeling completed for your new home build. And you were pretty darn excited about it, I got to say. What happened? What is it?
Well, I was excited about it for a few reasons. First of all, I just give a quick shout out to the folks that helped me get this energy modeling done. I had been having a conversation with Travis Brungard about my house, and I asked him about energy modeling and how much of it he does on his projects, and basically he was like, it's a no-brainer, and here's my contact, and he hooked me up with Joe Nichols at Thrive Building Solutions in Kansas City, who I sent an email to and asked him what we needed to do. And he gave me a quick list of what he needed from me, which was a copy of my plans, building plans, and just sort of specs on all my assemblies and R values and air tightness targets and U factors for windows, really simple stuff that once you've got the plans done or close to done for a house. And
what does something like this cost, if I could be so forward?
Very affordable, $500.
That seems very affordable. Okay, yeah. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to get a little context for what we're doing.
Yeah, here. And so Joe gets the information to his engineers, and then they a few weeks later, I get a report, and he sat down and went over it with me yesterday. And so I was excited for back to the two reasons I was excited. The first reason was because I was very happy with the energy modeling for my house, which I can talk a little bit about in a moment. The second reason was because I just learned so much interesting stuff going through the report with Joe about energy modeling and what it can teach you about your design. So it's essentially
like what?
Okay. So it's essentially, it's largely a manual J. Calculation, right? But it's I think the software that they use and the way they generate these reports goes a bit beyond what you would get from, sort of a average manual J. So not only, you get the CFM requirements for forced air systems for the whole house. You get the BTU breakdown for heating and cooling, all that kind of stuff. And from this, you can very easily and accurately design a system. But you get some more interesting stuff, like charts that show you heat gain throughout the day in each room. So therefore you can, so you can start to think about windows and
so tweak their location, I presume.
Is this, so you sent him the information.
Yep.
And is the idea of this whole thing to have him just say, this is how it's going to perform? Or is it kind of is the service more of, hey, he says, if you change this, this will happen, or if you do it this way, this will happen? I mean, are you changing anything based on his report?
So it's all of that plus what you need to get to choose your mechanical equipment and design the system. And so I might consider a few things based on his report, but I kind of feel like, and I think Joe kind of agreed that the house is in a sweet spot. So he showed me that, I could turn the orientation of the house slightly and increase performance a little bit. It doesn't make great sense to do that on my lot. If I had a different lot, and if I was in, if I sort of had like acreage and was not in a neighborhood, but was in the middle of a space where like the way where the house faced wasn't so important aesthetically, like I might turn it a little bit and actually increase performance a little bit. He showed me how lowering the U factor of the windows would increase performance, but he also said that in my situation, he didn't think that would lower it enough to change the mechanical requirements. I'd still need sort of to spend the same amount of money on my mechanical system. So even though there might be some savings in running it, then you start to look at sort of, payback or ROI in that case, and you have to decide, is it worth the extra, $10,000 to go to triple pane windows when I'm going to be paying the same amount for my mechanical equipment, and it's only going to increase efficiency so much. So you can start to dial that all in really tightly. He showed me that I probably don't need the amount of under slab and slab edge insulation that I had, that I could probably get away with, I think, about half of what I had spec'd.
Well, just out of curiosity, because I'm at that stage right now, what did you spec, not for the edges, but for the, for the field?
Yes, I spec'd around R8. And basically the model showed that as long as I have R3, I'm going to get the same performance. Diminishing returns happen quickly underneath the slab.
So R8, is that like a 1 inch rigid foam? Is that?
It seems like 1 inch rigid foam is enough to do what I.
Okay, that's what I was planning. That's good to know.
What I need to do in this.
Yeah, so I don't even need to do this. I'm just going to start asking you questions and save $500.
It was fascinating. I learned so much talking to Joe about this, and,
it sounds like Joe should work with us on a feature for the magazine to describe what these things are and how they can help you with your build, right?
And right, because it's like we think of manual J as something that we do to choose to size our mechanicals, right? And then you go into mechanical D and S for like the layout and duct sizing and stuff like that. But this could really, if you were starting from a less sure place with your design. I mean, I basically mimic designs that we've published in this climate zone, so many times that I kind of knew where to start. Yeah. But if you're less sure, if you're really having to value engineer your project for, the costs, I think this kind of report can really guide you, pretty well. I think Joe would be great to write an article about this stuff. And he'd also be a great guest on Pro Talk, Patrick.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
He's really smart and articulate, and like I said, I learned a ton and feel really good about where
I'm hoping you'll make an introduction for me so we can have him on Pro Talk, because that seems like that would be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, and just about the house, and just to follow up on another conversation that we had last week or 2 weeks ago on the podcast that applies to my house and Mark's house. I had sent Mike Gurton a question about footing drains, and I was asking him, like, how do you decide whether you want your footing drain outside the footing, inside the footing, or both? And Mike replied with a great checklist for kind of, he said it's kind of soft science because you're really making a judgment call. But he talked about looking at like historic water tables, the design of the house, the ability to have proper grading and gutters and all that stuff. And you have to make a judgment call about the footings. But then he said something interesting. He said, if you do an interior footing drain and if it's drained to daylight, there's a good chance that takes care of your radon issue as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't thought of that. That's essentially, if you do everything else right, you air seal, your vapor retarder and all that, that's essentially a passive radon mitigation system.
I wish I would have known that. I wish I would have known that about 10 days ago.
Yeah, there's a reason we ask him stuff all the time.
Yeah, he said if you're gonna have gravel under your slab anyway, you're gonna have the vapor retarder, so it's gonna be air sealed, and he said as long as it's getting to daylight and not to a sump.
Huh. Yeah, that's exactly what I have. But now I have apparently 2 systems in that space.
I want to remind, we should talk about Jeff's deck. Have you done anything on your deck yet, Jeff?
Yeah, I've started putting the decking down, so I've got almost half of it down. Somewhere
How's that
between
going?
A third and a half. Slowly. It's physically demanding. It's a lot of up and down, and I can definitely see why they have the stand-up drivers for that.
So what brand? I'm looking at a photo here. What brand are you using?
It's Fiberon and the camo edge clips.
Sure.
How do you like the camo edge clips? That's a product that seems to have a lot of promise to me.
It's very cool.
Yeah, and they work well, right? It's a no. Yeah.
Yeah, it's as long as you're snug it up, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's like you really can't do it too wrong.
That's the product I'm always looking for.
Yeah, I mean, you can over tighten, but
in Fiberon, is that the one that's kind of made out of like recycled carpeting or something? It's like nylon. It's a different type of material rather than the typical composites, or am I getting?
I think it's a normal fiber composite.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. It's what Home Depot's product, right, Jeff?
No, actually, I got this at Ring's End. So
okay.
Yeah.
Happy with it? You like it?
Yeah. The only thing
nice.
that kind of surprised me was that none of the ends are square.
They're just badly cut? You have to cut everything?
Yeah.
That's freaking annoying.
Yeah, so I started putting the first 2 pieces in. It's like, why isn't this joint parallel? And it's like, all right, is something blocking it?
And it's not even bad enough that your attention is called to it. You have to figure this out by screwing down the deck boards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How off are they?
Not. Oh, I mean, well, you've got a 6-inch board. I mean, there's maybe a 16th in the gap difference in the gap. So between 2 boards, I don't know.
Enough to be noticeable.
Yeah.
Enough to cut.
Yeah. And it's consistent.
It's
They're consistently off.
Consistently off, yes.
Huh.
I haven't run into one that's square, and I've been squaring both ends, even though I don't necessarily
that
have
would
to
drive me
do it.
bananas.
I mean,
that is not something
wood,
you should have to deal with. Yeah.
With wood, I can kind of see it because things shift around, but with a man-made product like that, you'd think that it would be just right on the money.
Yeah, I can't imagine how they're doing it.
They say it's hard to find good help.
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
So this, we should remind folks, is the 400th Fine Homebuilding podcast, and I think that is a pretty good achievement. But I'm going to ask Brian to talk a little bit about that at the end of the show, where we started versus where we are now, and I'd like to ask listeners to share their favorite moments on the podcast for maybe some kind of compilation show or whatever. I think that would be super fun. My stair and closet project is moving forward. I primed and painted last weekend. Liam came in and laughed because it is a 5x5 room with an 8-foot ceiling that is painted completely white. And he's like, this is the grimmest space I have ever been in.
It's like an insane asylum lockup room. Or...
it's like it's a closet, dude. Anyway.
Was it the whitest white, Patrick?
It was so white, Mark. So I bought this paint, and here's like 10 years ago, and it's still in a bucket, and it's still fine. I stirred it up, and I was like, I don't know how this is going to work, but it was fine. There you go. Well, we better get to the show here. This comes from Brandon, who is a professional home inspector. Hello, fine folks. Here in Minnesota, passive radon systems are now required, meaning the pipe is installed with a penetration through the roof. A receptacle is provided within the attic space, so the option to add an inline fan is available, which turns it into an active system. Passive systems will still help depressurize beneath the slab, assisting with radon levels. How about that, Brian? Rough estimates for adding a system in Minnesota in old construction vary, but according to the Minnesota Department of Health and my research with local radon mitigation specialists, they're roughly $1,500. It usually involves PVC rooted to the exterior at the rim joist and extended above the highest eave. It's not the most attractive option, especially on older, beautiful Victorians, but it's what you have to do. For all intents and purposes, roughly 150,000 people die every year from lung cancer. This number varies yearly, but the data I've been able to get from the American Lung Association, I think, is a good rough estimate. According to cancer.gov, scientists estimate that roughly 15,000 to 22,000 lung cancer deaths in the U.S. are related to radon. Of the 15 to 22,000 most cancer deaths yearly associated with radon, roughly 10% of these are among non-smokers, meaning roughly 1,500 to 2,200 lung cancer deaths yearly among non-smokers in the U.S. are related to radon exposure. If we're to take the high end of that, that means that radon exposure alone accounts for roughly 1.5% of lung cancer deaths. My point here is not to say that radon cannot in some circumstances pose a health risk, but rather the situation is much more complex than often presented by the realtor associations and local governing bodies. Each individual should take into account his or her own lifestyle choices to make an informed decision on how to act. Whether or not radon is present in high levels, radon mitigation can often provide benefits outside of reducing radon, such as the ability to reduce humidity levels throughout your home, particularly in older construction. Of course, new information is always coming to light, and the beautiful thing about building science and science in general is we can always learn from our past mistakes and build better, safer, smarter homes for everyone. Well, Brandon, that was great. Thank you for that. What do you guys think?
That was, certainly helpful and gave the discussion a lot of context. The only thing that was missing from that I kept thinking about was of those illnesses caused by radon exposure. Are they all related to homes, or is there? And I don't know. I'm just posing the question: is there another place where people are being exposed to? Is there a workplace,
certainly your workplace
situation? That is a radon hazard. I don't know what I only hear about radon hazards as it relates to homes.
Are businesses? That's a good question, Patrick. Are businesses? When you sell a house now, they the radon test is standard fare. Are businesses required to do radon? Can you imagine how many office spaces would have to be? How would you retrofit a 10,000 square foot office space if there was radon?
You put the PVC under the floor, Mark, and then you run it up through the window.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, it was funny that you mentioned that, Brian, because I did a passive system because I do have the drain tile around the perimeter. It's all gravel in there. And I just ran a T, basically a 4-inch T, and then ran the pipe up just above the concrete so I can cap it, test for radon, and if there's radon, and I placed it in such a place where I could run it up and out easily after the fact, like through the corner of a garage or something like that. So, but even hearing what you said, I probably would have done the same thing because it does daylight. My drain tile does daylight, but it cost $12 and took me 10 minutes to do. So
yeah.
Dyami wrote into a conversation that we have regularly about roof outsulation. He says, I'm just listening to episode 327, Driving Through Manhattan. I just listened to the gentleman in climate zone 6 who was worried about venting his 5 and 12 pitch cathedral ceiling roof and how to do the insulation. Well, my scenario is a bit different. When you mentioned that due to the low pitch, you didn't think venting was a good idea and how it would be best to install insulation above the roof deck. But it's hard to find a contractor who's willing to do this. So we talk about this a lot. So I suggest he find a steep slope commercial roofing company to look at his roof. In our experience, we have done it on nursing homes, assisted living facilities, churches, etc. And I'm planning to do it on my own home. If he reaches out to commercial roofers in his areas, they should have more experience than a typical residential roofer. I hope that's helpful. And I sincerely apologize for the complete lack of punctuation, as this was voice dictated and it does a pretty poor job of knowing where sentences end. Hope all is well. Look forward to talking to you soon, Dyami. So, Dyami, thanks. I don't know, as many times as we suggest commercial roofers for projects, I don't know that we have suggested one for a steep slope roof outsulation project. So there you go.
So one thing to consider, I've only had dealings with, and I don't remember what the project was, but it was something where it was a little beyond what the average residential roofer. So we got some bids, and it was the first time getting bids from commercial roofers. And it was like 3 or 4 times more money than I was expecting it to be. And I'm not sure. So 2 things. If you do, one thing I would say for sure, normally the average people say get 3 bids. If you can get more than 3 bids from commercial roofers, it's worthwhile, because the bids that we did get, I mean, they varied by, some were twice as expensive as others. So
do you think that's because they just really didn't want that project?
Yes.
I mean, yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly right. So, but you don't want to get that one bid where it's the contractor who doesn't want that project and be stuck with that one bid. You do want to find the one guy who actually wants to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck. Hi, Fine Homebuilding podcast crew. I was just listening to episode 392 and wanted to send my experience related to Dia Swag in Daly City. I have lived in San Francisco for more than 15 years, and the Bay Area's microclimates present unique challenges that need to be addressed when retrofitting a home. For example, parts of Daly City have massive amounts of fog for much of the year and will have no clear days. This means that moisture and comfort problems are significantly different than most climates in the winter. I live in a 1920s era house in the outer Richmond neighborhood of San Francisco, north of Golden Gate Park, a mile from the Pacific Ocean. The price per square foot is $1,100, it has less fog than parts of Daly City, but still has significant moisture on the limited sunny days. We call August Fogust, as we rarely see the sun in late summer. That's pretty funny. I have lived in the 20 eras home that has had significant retrofit work done and is probably from a similar era as Dia's Swag. Plaster walls, board sheathing, no insulation, and knob and tube wiring. The back of the house has a mixture of redwood and Douglas fir clapboards, and the front is stucco. Yes, they use stucco in high moisture climates, and all the houses have rot issues on the fronts, but the old-grown redwood and Doug fir does fairly well. When we first moved in, our furnace ran almost year-round outside of May and September, which is summer for us. Here are my experiences. Adding insulation to these houses is a major undertaking due to the lack of internal vapor retarders and high moisture levels. So adding insulation inside the walls often leads to massive amounts of rot on the sheathing. Because the air is so damp in the winter, upgrading the window represents a big boost to comfort, and I would recommend it in all bedrooms and areas where people sit near the windows. You can get by with less heat, particularly at night, which reduces heating bills. We replaced our flat tar paper roof with an external insulated sprayed roof, mostly due to the 30-year warranty and cheaper install costs. The added benefit was our furnace now rarely runs, so our heating costs have dropped dramatically. The downside is the furnace was the only thing in the house keeping the moisture at bay. Now we have 60 to 70% humidity inside without dehumidifiers, so rot, mildew, and mold are an issue in areas without airflow, like closets and my basement office. Make sure to look at any older decks on homes like this, because particularly where they attach to the side of the house, they have so much moisture sandwiched between the deck supports from decades of repairs, it's often led to boards that can't dry out and turn to mush. In our case, 3 ledger boards have been lag bolted on top of the exterior wood siding, and an errant cut through the tar paper decades ago led to spreading rot and moisture that caused wood flooring to buckle in the adjacent room. I've removed the rot and treated or replaced the PT, rebuilt the deck, and have an air gap between the ledger and the siding now. I would be careful with doing extensive air sealing without putting in some sort of way to manage air quality and humidity, as it is a constant battle when one has no central AC. Thanks, Alex. Well, there we go. Someone who actually knows what they're talking about, writing from the Bay Area, which is interesting. I had no idea that Daly City was so wet.
No, and I was surprised that the windows made that much of a difference with the uninsulated wall. That was surprising. So the uninsulated wall, you've seen the siding solutions where they drill holes outside of your siding and they dump the insulation in there, which I always thought was a little dicey, especially. But they have something new now that it's more of a foam that they spray in there. Is that, I mean, what do you think of that whole system? I always thought, what are the odds you're going to get every cavity filled even 80% of the way? Yeah.
I mean, IR cameras are mainstream. I don't know, man. Dense packed cellulose in old homes, like as part of weatherization products, is mainstream fare. Some of those houses later have peeling paint problems, I've observed, because they are now like they can't dry out in the wintertime like they used to. So I don't know what the solution is. What do you think, Brian?
Well, it's pretty common practice, at least in the Northeast, to fill the walls of old houses with blown in cellulose, right? And the quality of the job that gets done is probably varies. And, like you said, you can use an IR camera to get a pretty good picture of how the installation has been done. I don't know how many installers are actually doing that.
They don't want to know, is my guess.
They might not want to know. And it has caused problems and it has caused paint failures, but it hasn't. But it can work fine. And maybe your painting maintenance schedule increases a little bit, but I wouldn't dismiss it as like a problematic way to go. I don't know much about the success of the what are they called? Pour and fill foam products.
Yeah.
They kind of pour.
And there's only one, I think it's only isonine that has it. And maybe I'm wrong about that.
Yeah. And they sort of pour in as a liquid, right? So they drop to the bottom of the cavity and then expand and work their way up through the cavity. I don't know how that, I imagine that's a pretty, it's expanding foam. So I imagine that, when it's done right, it can work pretty well in the right situation, of course, in the right wall. So, I think it's going to depend on a lot whether or not a insulation retrofit is a good idea or not, and what its actual efficacy is going to be. I wonder maybe if pour installations aren't a little bit of a benefit, so that there's still some energy moving through that wall and it doesn't change. It doesn't actually change that so much, and you don't run into the same problems. It just adds a little bit of thermal performance. Like we criticize a lot, like pour insulation installations for not being efficient, but it doesn't mean they're not providing any thermal performance. Sure. Right? It's just diminished. It's just not as good as it could be. When fiberglass bats aren't installed well, it's not that they're not insulating the house at all. They're just not insulating the house as well as they could if they were installed well. So the same thing, I think, goes with an insulation retrofit.
My only concern with those is the spaces that they don't get, which there will be. Now, is there that much more moisture moving back and forth in those is it concentrated in those areas?
That's how that physics works, right?
Right.
But cellulose insulation, it buffers vapor drive. So cellulose insulation, can actually, like if you already have vapor drive issues, it can actually buffer it a little bit. So how does that affect the wall profile? It
still has to dry though, right? Like you still have to have a period of drying. And if you're in this climate, this microclimate, and you're not running air conditioning, how the heck is it going to dry? Because it's wet all the time, right?
It's wet all the time. Yeah. And that's what we don't want, right? We want walls to get wet to be able to dry.
We want more drying than wetting.
Drying than wetting. Correct.
Oh my God. So we heard more on this. So we should just stay out of the Bay Area, I would say, from now on. This comes from John. Hey guys, just started listening to the podcast. I'm in Sonoma County, so I'm familiar with the area. Lots of microclimates. First, replace that knob and tube wiring. Daly City is just north of San Francisco and extremely foggy, cold relative to California, and damp. There's no sun. PV isn't great. The best things for comfort are radiant solutions. Air sealing these old pigs is hard, but you might get some benefit there. Electricity is crazy expensive. Insulation can help, but you want to mind the moisture issues if the envelope isn't tight. The most bang for your buck is moving.
So, yeah. He agrees with you, Patrick.
It's hilarious. Oh my God, we have the best listeners. This is so great. All right, so let's get to a question. Man, how long has the show been going on? Matt says, hey, Patrick and crew, this isn't an air slang question, but I hope you can help anyway. Love the show and the magazine was just arrived. There's always something of value in them, so I consider my collection to be a repository of future project help. I'm remodeling of my basement, which is against the front wall, and I was demoing. I found moisture on the back of 2-inch foil-faced foam board. The moisture on the foam is concerning to me, and I have to address it before finishing out the space. The house is a 52 ranch near Sunapee, New Hampshire, and has a metal roof. Currently, there are no gutters, nor will there be, since ice is a major thing here. Where the runoff lands, it sits right against the foundation, and the garden bed in the front of the house slopes back to the house. I plan to add the FHB and GBA ground gutter system to run the water away from the house and off a hill on the far side. Then inside, I like the idea of the risk-free basement details from FHB and Steve Basic. However, I'd like to reuse the foam board I pulled off and not waste it. Inside this remodeled space will be a bedroom and a bathroom, with the bath on the wall showing the moisture. Do you think the ground gutter will be sufficient to address this, or is it possible the moisture is from the inside somehow collecting behind the foam board with nowhere to go? Do I need to do closed cell spray foam or 2 layers of cut and cobble rigid foam? Thanks, Matt.
So I'm confused a little bit by his question. Where was the foam board? And where was the moisture?
So it sounded like it was on his basement wall, and he pulled it off, and it was behind it.
So it was in between.
There was photos, and he pulled off some like Thermax type foil face insulation, and the whole wall, you can tell it's just kind of moldy and damp.
Oh,
he's got pictures of how the landscaping is. Yeah, that landscaping is driving all that water right back to the house. So that is the number one thing.
And in snowy New Hampshire, that thing is getting loaded with snow and ice that then melts in the spring, and it's gonna the basement's gonna be warmer than the soil, so it's gonna go that way, is my guess. Right?
That's the first thing. And as far as no gutters go, I mean, the ice shouldn't be that much of a problem. I wouldn't think if his attic was insulated properly. But,
I'm going to address this because I have experience living in northern New England, and you do too in Minnesota. There's like this places where you get so much snow and ice, it accumulates, right? There's no melting, so it just accumulates like a glacier, right? It's just So that's why people don't have gutters, because they fill up with snow and ice and rip off the house. So you can't.
So if they're hung right, they shouldn't be ripping off the house, but they just fill up with ice in the winter and melt in the summer. The other thing I was thinking about this problem, once he deals with the landscape, I mean, if he does the landscaping and slopes it away from the house, that's going to solve a lot of it, and the drain tile for sure, or the French drain or whatever he was doing. But one thing I would do after so those moisture meters that do wood, will they do concrete too? Because I would test how wet that concrete is right now. And then I would do my whatever fixes outside. And then I would let it sit for a few weeks and come back and test it again before I even thought about closing that out.
Good suggestion.
And the other thing about closed cell, you can't spray closed cell. I forget what the moisture level is, but it won't stick to something if it's above like 18% moisture or something like that. Right. So just covering it with closed cell and hoping that solves the problem is not the answer for sure.
I've had great success with ground gutters, as Fine Homebuilding describes them, to solve water management problems in my own property. So I would definitely do that. It's better to dig down to the footing and put the drain tile there, right? And then even better is to backfill entirely with gravel. And then you have this capillary spaces are too big that you can't have the water accumulate. It just won't sit there. I don't know. It's a hard thing, Matt, and nobody wants to dig up their front lawn, right? Anything to add, Jeff?
Not really. I mean, I think, it's definitely coming from the outside, so he's got to deal with it out there.
You heard it from Jeff. Linda says, I would like to hear more about this paint. So she sent me a link to a USA Today story. The whitest paint in the world has been created in a lab at Purdue University. A paint so white that it could eventually reduce or even eliminate the need for air conditioning, scientists say. The paint has now made it into the Guinness World Record book as the whitest ever made. So the scientists, why did they create such a paint? It turns out that breaking a world record wasn't the goal. Curbing global warming was. When we started this project about 7 years ago, we had saving energy and fighting climate change in mind, says Julien Rouen, Ron, I'm sure I'm saying that incorrectly, a professor of mechanical engineering at Purdue, in his statement, the idea was to make a paint that would reflect sunlight away from a building. Making the paint really reflective, however, also made it really white. The paint reflects 98.1% of solar radiation while also emitting infrared heat. Because the paint absorbs less heat from the sun than it emits, a surface coated with this paint is cooled below the surrounding temperature without consuming power. That is mind-blowing to me. How does that work?
It's really white paint, Patrick. Really, really white. So are we? In 15 years, are all our roofs going to be white?
Or everything,
then,
right?
Yeah, and then we're gonna have. I wonder how. I hate to be a skeptic, but that's who I am. What happens if you get a month's worth of dust? I mean, do you have to clean it every week to make sure it stays really, really white? Or I don't know. I don't know how that works.
So dirt would, I'm sure, impede its reflectivity, right?
We've on Green Building Advisor over the years, we've reported over and over and over again on white and reflective surfaces for roofs, for cool walls, for city streets, and I think I think a lot of the science goes over my head, so I'm going to say this in a very non-scientific way. But I think the fact is, that it works. It works. It cools. To have these.
Thanks for that explanation.
to have so-called cool roofs, so-called cool walls, so-called cool city streets. It works. The question is it, and the question always is with this stuff, is it where to put our energy and our money? Does it work enough?
Yeah. Well, I think commercial roofs are white is as common as black used to be, isn't it? Maybe even more common.
Yeah. And I know that for example, we did, I think, there's been some research done on walls with cool walls, and the research shows that cool walls can reduce cooling loads, right? There's no denying that. But we've also seen some research on dark colored walls with an air gap behind them, with a rain screen detail. And when you add the rain screen detail, the dark colored walls actually don't increase heat gain.
Because of convection?
Because of convection in that space, I guess. So a well-insulated, air-sealed assembly with an air gap, and all of a sudden you're not actually increasing. So the question is, again, is it a place worth putting your money for materials that might cost more to gain efficiency? And second, is it worth the aesthetic decision?
Yeah.
Everyone's got to make a call on what they want their place to look like. And
if we do go all white. Yeah, if we do go all white, I'm investing in a sunglass company, because
that's what my first thought is. We're all
walking through a city that's all white. It'd be like walking through a blizzard on a sunny, or not a blizzard, but on a
we'll all have cataracts by the time we're 30, is my guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be melting each other's vinyl siding.
Yeah.
So, I'm the first to admit I was not a really good physics student. And when I say not really good, that's probably being charitable. However, energy can neither be created or destroyed was one of the things I remember from physics class. Where the heck is this reflected energy going? Where is it?
I'm glad you said it, because I was going to ask it, but I was afraid it was too dumb of a question. So I was thinking, yeah, okay. So the heat bounces off these roofs. Isn't it going back into the atmosphere, or is it just flying out into space? Where is this heat going to, or the energy? So I don't know.
It's clear we need someone other than
I was an English major, so you got one step above me.
Well, it does go back out into space, I believe. Isn't that what the night sky radiation's all about?
Yes. Right? I think
so too. I did worse in physics than you did, Patrick. And that's being charitable.
Honestly, I wish I would have paid more attention at this point in my life, because, we talk a lot about physics concepts. It would probably be helpful for my brain. So this comes from Mike in Golden, British Columbia. Hi, everybody. My wife and I are finishing up a major remodeling renovation on our 60-year-old home. Fortunately, we had some rather unskilled carpenters, he puts carpenters in quotes, do most of the work. That is until we had enough of their mistakes and poor workmanship and we sent them packing. They were all very nice guys, but just not skilled at what they do. Anyways, my dilemma is the flashing job that was done above some new windows that were installed. The attached pictures will do a better job describing what the problem is, but what you can't see is the damage that the intruding water did to the interior window jamb and sill. What do you guys think I should do about keeping the water out of the house? Is there much I can do without replacing the flashing? I'm hoping there's an adhesive strong enough that I could use it to glue a small dam to the end of each head flashing. Thanks for any help you can give, Mike, Golden, BC. So did you guys look at these photos?
I
did. Who wants to describe them?
Yeah, so what? The one photo actually doesn't look wrong. You know, if you were to look at, and I took a glance at Hardy. I'm not sure if this is Hardy or SmartSide or what it is, but it's really if you compare some of the photos to what Hardy says installation practices are, these are okay. Because what there are, so you have a window and it's picture framed with some trim boards, and then there's a drip head flashing or a drip cap above that, and then there's a gap. It looks like you're supposed to leave about a 1/4 inch gap. It looks like there's a 1/2 inch or a 5/8 inch gap up between the head flashing and the siding. But on the ends where the corners of the windows are, you can see a hole where water would run right down into behind the siding. So
these folks were amateurs. I mean, just the work, the cuts and stuff. It looks bad. So I would be worried about what's going on back there.
So here's I think he's missed it. You know, there's one photo that says a lot. Here's what these guys did. They installed the siding first and ran the trim boards over the top of the siding. So instead of putting the picture framing the window in and running the siding butting into the trim boards, they actually covered the siding with the trim boards. So no matter what he does, I mean, she's at this point, you just have to go with the caulking gun and caulk all the way around those windows. I mean, if that's the cheapest fix, but yeah, that was a big mistake. Because now any kind of driving rain is just going to go right behind those trim boards and right into the house.
Cut that siding back and fix it.
That also, yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. It seems like also gives him the opportunity, if you'd like, to pop that trim off.
Yeah, yep, that's true.
Siding back, and then he could also get a peek at the flange and how the flashing is around the flange, and see if there's anything that he could kind of help with behind it all.
Yeah, I don't know. It's putting the trim over the siding like that. I've never seen that before. And then they notched out the siding. It was a very strange deal. But one thing I was surprised to see in the manual that I just quickly looked at is when we were doing situations like this, we would bend the flashing over on the back sides. So any water that runs along the top of the window, and we would put little caulk in on each side so it wouldn't run back in there. Which I didn't see that. And I could have been mistaken.
Say that again, please. I'm not understanding. You fold down the edges of the head flashing onto the side casings, right?
Yes. Yep. Just for one little more barrier so that it doesn't run behind there. And then we would actually caulk. I mean, the reason there's a gap and you're not supposed to caulk the top is because now we pay so much more attention to letting water out than keeping it out.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. But then water, if you still have to keep it out. So we would always put little dams at each corner.
Brian, there's been some contentious arguments from Fine Homebuilding readers who say that you should have those little end dams on the head flashing bent up, not down. Isn't that correct?
Oh, yep. You know what? Yeah. That's another. Yep, you're right. You're right. You know what? Actually, I take it back. When we were doing vinyl siding, we would fold it into the jams. But you're right. When we were doing this type of siding, we would fold it up and create a little dam there.
And I honestly think running it, at least a 1/4 or 3/8 inch past the top of the head flashing is really good practice. It doesn't hurt, right? It's just...
And yeah, the funny thing, the manual didn't say either one of those things. So that was a little surprising.
Well, Mike, I'm glad you kicked these guys off the job, even though they were nice, because these were hacks. I'm sorry.
I really like a soldered head flashing. I know it's an expensive way to go, but a soldered head flashing that has...
You doing that on your house?
Soldered joints that wraps the corner, and then the head can actually extend beyond it behind the siding. I mean, seems like sort of the Cadillac to me. I don't know. I thought maybe, it's expensive to have them made, but I thought it might also be a fun thing to learn to do, bend some copper and do some soldering. And
it's a chance to buy some new tools, which it would be a fun thing. Yeah. Jeff, you were nodding earlier. What were your thoughts on this?
Just the idea that the trim is over the siding is just, that's like Yeah, it really makes me question if there's any kind of flashing around the.
Yeah, they didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
No.
This comes from Adam. Hi, FHB. I'm wanting to add a threshold on my home. I purchased an aluminum one from the Orange store and am in the process of installing it. The home has brick walls that are 12 inches thick. The previous owners just ran the tile from the interior under the door to the sill edge. This left a large gap below the door and did look like it would drain too well to the outside. My real question is, can I pour a concrete sill below the new aluminum threshold I will be installing, or would a stone cut to fit be a better installation? Would I need some sort of weatherproofing below the stone or concrete pour? The aluminum threshold is 7 inches wide, and the total sill width would be 15 inches. Okay, so who wants to go first on this one?
I think there's several things. I think you could tile it. I think you could pour concrete. My biggest thing is, whatever you do, those kind of extension jams that they have that fill up that brick with, I would do everything possible to treat underneath those. I mean, I would just gob something on underneath there, polyurethane or something. Just because otherwise,
I love that the former siding guy is such a fan of caulking. That's fantastic.
No, not polyurethane. No, not caulking. Like a finish, like a polyurethane finish,
Paint.
like a woodworking finish. Or I've seen people use things like glue or just something. Actually, epoxy might be a good. Just take a putty knife and epoxy the butt, just to keep the water from sucking up or a piece of butyl tape, something in between. Because whatever you do, and I'm surprised those things lasted as long as they did, but it just seems like those things would wick up water fast. And then, of course, whatever you do, you got to make sure you slope it as much as you can.
Not as much as you can, I think you'd agree.
Well, in this scenario, you don't have a lot of room. There's only an inch, so.
And it's 15 inches wide, so you're gonna need all that. Brian, do you have any thoughts on this situation?
I just agree with everything Mark said.
Well, there we go. Jeff?
Keep the water out, create a pitch.
Yeah, and maybe a little step at the door, so there's a little rise up to so that water's not going to get under that.
Yeah, so the door should close against the threshold, right? Is what you're saying. There should be some kind of thing to have a stop on the threshold that the door closes against. Yeah. I've seen this detailed with stone, with concrete. I've also seen like glued up wood sills, which is a very traditional thing to do in old homes. Obviously, you're going to have to make sure that is well coated. Like Mark said, my choice would be epoxy, right? Like the kind of West System stuff, right? And I think that's a really attractive thing. But of course, that's going to be way more maintenance than a piece of concrete or a piece of stone with the aluminum threshold on top, right?
I did a wood sill, wood threshold once, and it sort of fit a real custom situation, older house and older door and whatnot. And I wish I went back to refinish it after about 9 months. It just gets beat on by it's horizontal, so the water sits. It gets beat on by the sun. So
you're walking on it all the time.
Right? Right. So the best finish you can put on there, the most durable finish you can put on there, even if it's glossy and thick, is worthwhile.
What's your thoughts on the wood sill, Jeff?
I think you got to be careful with your species and make sure that there's some sort of drainage below it so that it's not sitting on the stone directly.
You mean with like a sill pan flashing?
Yeah.
Well, anything you're gonna do, Adam, is better than what you got. So just go with that. So the 400th episode of the FHB podcast, I should have looked, and I meant to see how many podcasts Fine Woodworking is recorded. Do you know, Jeff?
I think they're in the high 200s.
Boy, that's significantly fewer than ours, I would observe.
Well, doing 2 a week is as opposed to 2 a month. Plus all
What do you think about 400 of these, Brian? Would you have ever thought that we would make this many?
Well, Clearly, I wouldn't have thought that we would make this many. And the reason I say that is because I think like when we launched the podcast, and I was there at the beginning and part of the first crew. I don't think we. I mean, and I can't speak for Justin and Rob. Maybe they had more vision than I did, but I don't think we took it seriously, because podcasting was sort of this new medium, and we were kind of like who wants to listen to us? Like we didn't really believe in I don't think we've necessarily believed in the success of it. And we kind of went into it with this attitude of, well, this is what we sit around and talk about at lunch, so like let's just record our conversations. And and then it was like, after a little while, I was like, holy shit, people like this. Like,
Whose idea was it
to
to
good feedback? We should probably do some research before we start talking. And, so we started to take it more seriously. And I think we had a blast doing it. We had fun. We just like being on this show today with the three of you, it's just enjoyable because we honestly like each other, and we like this topic, and we care a lot about it. But I do think I have to say that I do think, Patrick, when and this is in all honesty, I do think when you took over the podcast, it got better.
Well, thanks.
You decided to give it, like we hadn't yet shaped it and given it a format. We talked we really we just brought in topics and discussed them a lot. And we started to take questions, but you gave it this format of feedback and questions. And I think that, not only has that given us the opportunity to do a little bit of prep and to get ready and to make sure we feel good about how we're going to respond to things, but also it's included our listeners so much in it. Like, how often are we getting this great feedback on the things that we discussed in the last, so you've allowed our listeners to bring value to it. And I just think I think you're doing an awesome job.
Well, thanks. I maintain that the listeners are still easily the best part of the program, and their smarts and knowledge have elevated it so much. It's a pleasure that you all sharing this with us, and I enjoy it immensely. I love reading what you have to say, and I love that you are not scared to set us straight on our lack of knowledge of geography or any other subject, and I appreciate it very much. Do you know whose idea it was to start taking questions? Because I don't think you guys did that in the early ones, right? Is that correct?
We didn't do it right away, and at some point we started taking them and just incorporating them into the show here and there. I mean, we were trying a lot of stuff in the early days. We thought maybe the podcast should be interviews. So at times we brought people, guests, outside guests on, and had them, as sort of, we had Mike Pekovich on, we had Martin Holliday on, we had Mike Gurton on. You've added a new podcast to do that, because that is a viable format, but you've done it with Pro Talk. And so, so at some point we started taking some questions, but I think again that like when you took over, you sort of cemented that kind of format to the show. And it's working.
It's working. It sure is fun. Mark, what do you think about all this? You're new to the team, but you seem to be doing fine.
Oh, thanks. I was wondering, so you were in the first ones, Patrick, but when did you start producing them?
I was not in the first ones. It was like 120, right, Jeff, or something about that?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
And as soon as you joined, you started producing them, or at what number did you start producing them?
So at some point, Justin asked me to take it over because he just had too much to do. And I honestly, it was very shortly after I started being on.
Okay. Because the one thing I will say, I've filled in for Patrick on a couple, we're doing one later today, on a couple of the Pro Talks. And it's a lot of work to produce these. I mean, there's a lot of things to read. There's a lot of email communications back and forth. Hats off to you, Patrick. It's a lot of work to do. And hopefully people, because you do 2 a week, and that's a lot of time. Plus, you do obviously a lot of other things. So, thanks for the effort.
You're welcome. It's a joy. I get to talk to some really interesting people. I think you'd agree, and I'm excited to hear what folks thought about the live podcast recording we did at the Midwest Building Science Show. And once again, I'll apologize to the folks who watch the podcast, although I do find that a little bit baffling why people watch it. But anyway, yes. There's no video of that recording because we just didn't have the video capability at the hall. But I think it was a really good show because what we did is we actually asked the audience questions, which kind of turned the tables and added a new dimension. So I'll be curious what you folks think of that. Did you listen to it, Jeff?
Yeah.
What'd you think?
It was good. It was really good. It was actually some good people that you should probably hit up for Pro Talks.
Mariana, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Specifically, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for helping me do this, and thanks to all of you for listening. It is truly an enjoyable experience for me, and I hope you all like it too, because it's different. Anyone else want to say anything? We have to better rehearse what we're going to say at the end of the show, I got to say.
Patrick, you're the host.
I know. I should do something, right? Hey, those folks out there, when we get them, the end note, the weird, quirky story or weird thing to talk about, I love. I think the most recent one we had was the plywood mini satellite, which Ben Bogey launched from Sandy Hook. So if you guys find weird stuff to talk about, please do that. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Brian, Mark, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to FHB Podcast, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Thanks again for listening.